Hey sleepyhead, tonight we're keeping it simple. If you've been tossing and turning, unable to switch your mind off, this one's for you. Tonight, you'll be asleep in no time like a philosopher. We're going to drift through some of the most fascinating ideas about the human mind, life, and the way we see the world, from ancient wisdom like Stoicism, to the different personality types, the biases that shape our decisions, the science of happiness, and even the emotional stages we all face. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always interesting to see who's joining from different corners of the world. And let's float gently through concepts, reflections, and insights until sleep finally catches you. So you begin a deliberate journey, walking through each major branch of philosophy, not as a distant observer, but as a participant, asking yourself the same questions that have occupied minds for millennia. Metaphysics, the ground beneath all thought. You step first into metaphysics, and it feels like entering the foundations of reality itself. Here, you are not merely learning about facts in the world, you are questioning the very structure of the world and the nature of existence. Metaphysics asks you to pause and ask, what is real? What does it mean to exist? You stand in a mental space where concepts like time, space, causality, and substance unfold before you, not as fixed truths, but as mysteries to be examined. You ask yourself, is time an independent reality that flows regardless of whether you observe it, or is it something that exists only in relation to events and perception? You consider space, is it an empty container in which objects exist, or is it a web of relationships between things? Metaphysics also forces you to confront the mind-body problem. You imagine your own thoughts, feelings, and sensations, and then you ask, are these purely physical processes inside your brain, or do they belong to a non-physical realm of mind? If mind and matter are different, how do they interact? And if they are the same, how can subjective experience arise from matter alone? Causality steps forward as another riddle. Is every event in the universe determined by prior causes, like a vast cosmic chain stretching backward through time? Or is there a place for true randomness, or even free will? If free will exists, what does it mean for responsibility, choice, and moral judgment? You explore substance and properties, the idea that everything you see might be reducible to a small set of ultimate building blocks, whether they are atoms, particles, fields, or something even more fundamental. You begin to see why metaphysics is not simply one branch among others but the bedrock on which all other philosophical inquiries rest. If you decide that only physical matter is real, that decision will ripple outward into ethics, epistemology, politics, and even art. At this stage, you recognize a deep truth. Every philosophical question hides a metaphysical commitment. Before you can say how we know something, epistemology, you must decide what exists to be known. Before you can declare something good or bad, ethics, you must decide whether value is a real property of the world or a human invention. You realize you cannot escape metaphysics. Whether you consciously choose a position or not, you live with assumptions about reality, and those assumptions quietly shape every belief you hold. You leave the hall of metaphysics with your mind sharpened but unsettled. You know you've just touched the surface of its depth, yet even this brief encounter has changed the way you look at the world. Now you are ready to step into the next great chamber, epistemology. Epistemology, the pathways to knowledge. You leave metaphysics with questions about what is real echoing in your mind, but soon you realize that knowing what is only half the battle. Even if you decide reality has certain features, how can you be sure you know them? This is where epistemology steps forward. You now face a new set of questions. What is knowledge? How do you know what you claim to know? And what if everything you believe could be mistaken? The first thing you learn here is the classic distinction between knowledge and belief. You can believe something that turns out to be false, but you cannot know something false. Knowledge requires truth, but truth alone is not enough. You also need justification. You must be able to explain why your belief is true, and that explanation must hold up under scrutiny. You start examining the sources of knowledge. Experience, the sensory input that gives you direct contact with the world. Reason, the capacity to derive truths through logic and deduction. Intuition, the sudden insight that feels true without step-by-step reasoning. Testimony, learning from others, trusting their accounts, and building knowledge collectively. Each source has strengths and weaknesses. Experience is vivid but can deceive you, or optical illusions are proof of that. Reason is powerful but depends on the accuracy of your starting premises. Intuition can reveal patterns instantly, but it is prone to bias. Testimony allows you to know more than you could ever discover on your own, but it depends on trust and the credibility of others. Soon you meet skepticism, the shadow that follows epistemology everywhere. The skeptic whispers, "What if nothing can be known with certainty? What if all your experiences are illusions? What if you're dreaming right now? What if the external world is just a simulation?" This isn't just a thought experiment, it forces you to think about what counts as good evidence. If you can't be certain, can you still be justified in your beliefs? You begin to see that epistemology is not just about acquiring knowledge, but also about defining the limits of what you can know. You also notice something important: epistemology acts like a filter for every other branch of philosophy. If metaphysics says this is what exists, epistemology asks, how can you be sure? If ethics says this is what's right, epistemology asks, how do you know it's right? Without solid answers here, your conclusions in any other field stand on shaky ground. As you move deeper into this realm, you feel a shift in how you think. You no longer take information at face value. You ask, what is the source? How reliable is it? What assumptions am I making without noticing? In learning about knowledge, you have also learned to be more careful with your beliefs. Ethics, the compass of action. From the realm of knowing, you now turn to the realm of doing. Ethics greets you with a challenge. What should you do? What makes something right or wrong? You quickly discover that ethics is not just a list of rules but a deep investigation into values, principles, and the nature of moral responsibility. It is about deciding what kind of person you ought to be and what kind of society you ought to help create. You learn about three major frameworks. Utilitarianism, judge actions by their consequences. The right action is the one that produces the greatest overall good for the greatest number. This approach sounds practical, but it raises hard questions. How do you measure good? And can a bad act ever be justified if it leads to a greater benefit? Deontology, judge actions by their adherence to moral duties or laws. Here, certain acts are right or wrong regardless of their consequences. If lying is wrong, it is wrong even if it would save someone from harm. This offers moral clarity but can seem rigid when duties conflict. Virtue ethics, judge actions by the character they express. Instead of rules or calculations, focus on becoming a virtuous person, someone who embodies traits like honesty, courage, and compassion. But then you must ask, whose definition of virtue do you follow? Ethics also pushes you into applied moral philosophy, real-world dilemmas that cannot be solved with a simple yes or no. Should euthanasia be legal? Do you have a moral duty to address climate change? Is it ever ethical to break the law for a greater cause? The questions are endless, and you begin to see that your answers often rest on your metaphysical and epistemological foundations. If you believe humans have free will, moral responsibility makes sense. If you believe we are fully determined by biology and environment, responsibility becomes more complicated. If you believe moral truths are objective, you will look for universal rules. If you believe they are subjective, morality becomes a matter of cultural or personal choice. By the time you step away from ethics, you feel its weight. It is not abstract, it shapes every choice you make, every day. The compass you choose here will guide not only your actions but your view of justice, politics, and even art. Logic, the architecture of thought. You now walk into a bright, orderly hall lined with symbols and arguments. This is logic, the structure that keeps all your reasoning in check. Logic asks, are your arguments valid? Do your conclusions truly follow from your premises, or are you making hidden mistakes in reasoning? You begin with deductive reasoning, the kind that guarantees truth if your premises are true. For example, all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. If the premises are sound, the conclusion is certain. Then you meet inductive reasoning, which moves from specific examples to general conclusions. You've seen the sun rise every morning, so you conclude it will rise tomorrow. This is useful but never certain. The future might not always match the past. Logic also trains you to spot fallacies, errors that make arguments look persuasive but actually undermine them. You learn to recognize ad hominem attacks, attacking the person instead of the argument, false dilemmas, pretending there are only two options when more exist, and slippery slopes, claiming one small step will inevitably lead to disaster without evidence. Symbolic logic offers another level of precision. Here, arguments are translated into symbols and variables so you can test them mechanically, free from the ambiguity of natural language. This allows you to strip away emotion and focus on pure structure. The more you study logic, the more you see it as the invisible skeleton of thought. Every philosophical claim you make, in metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, or politics, must pass through this gate. If your reasoning is flawed, your conclusions collapse, no matter how inspiring or noble they seem. By the time you leave, you understand why logic is not just another branch of philosophy. It is the method that holds the entire philosophical enterprise together. Without it, everything else would be chaos. From here, you are ready to step into the final part of your journey, the realms of art, beauty, and governance, and then into the demanding process of distillation, where all of this vast terrain must fit into a single, perfect sentence. You've spent time exploring metaphysics, mapping the possible structures of reality, tracing cause and effect, and building a mental model of how the world might be. But a nagging thought refuses to leave you alone. If your mind can imagine all these structures, how do you know that any of them are true? What if the entire edifice of your knowledge is a castle built on sand? You begin with the most unsettling step, doubting everything. You strip away the inherited beliefs from culture, education, and memory. You start to wonder, what counts as proof? A shadow on the wall could be a trick of light. A memory could be distorted. Even your own reasoning could be flawed without you realizing it. Epistemology demands you consider that your senses, which seem so trustworthy, might be partial or even deceptive narrators. You try to pin down certainty. Can you be absolutely sure the sun will rise tomorrow? Experience tells you yes, it has risen every day you've been alive. But then you recall that your expectation of the future is built from the past. And the past, though remembered, is not here in front of you to be verified again. You realize that what you call the knowledge is often just highly confident belief. Then you explore the idea of justification. It's not enough to believe something, you must have good reasons for believing it. You consider the chain of reasoning behind your simplest convictions. You believe water boils at 100 degrees Celsius because you've seen it, but that knowledge also comes from a thermometer, which you trust because of physics, which you trust because of experiments, which you trust because, and on it goes. The chain seems endless, and at some point, you must either hit a foundation you cannot prove or accept an infinite regress. This is when skepticism sharpens its blade. What if no belief is immune to doubt? You test extreme possibilities, the dream hypothesis, the simulation hypothesis, the possibility that an all-powerful deceiver feeds you every perception. These thoughts are not just idle speculation, they are stress tests for your understanding of certainty. They force you to separate what you feel from what you can prove. Yet epistemology is not just about tearing down, it's about building resilient structures of thought. You begin to weigh theories of knowledge. Empiricism, where observation is the primary source of truth. Rationalism, where reason itself is the source of certainty. Constructivism, where knowledge is shaped by the mind's frameworks rather than being an exact mirror of reality. You experiment with each lens. Through empiricism, you focus on the data, the measurable, repeatable events. Through rationalism, you strip away the senses and trust only the clarity of pure logic. Through constructivism, you accept that your knowledge is always filtered through human limitations and cultural context. Slowly, you notice a shift in your inner stance. Before, you thought knowledge was like a chest of treasure, a set of facts you could own. Now, you see it as a living process, more like a candle flame, fragile, flickering, but illuminating. The value is not only in what you know, but in how you come to know it. And with that realization, you prepare to carry this mindset into the next arena. If epistemology teaches you how to know, ethics will challenge you on what you should do with that knowledge. You leave behind the vast, echoing halls of metaphysics, where existence and reality themselves were questioned, and step into a chamber lit not by torches but by the soft, unblinking glow of countless candles. Here, the air feels different, sharper, almost demanding clarity from you. This is the domain of epistemology, the study of knowledge itself. You immediately sense the change in atmosphere. In metaphysics, you were dealing with the raw shape of reality, like sculpting clay into a form. Here, in epistemology, the clay has already taken form, but the pressing question is, how do you even know it's real? You find yourself confronted not by vast cosmic questions, but by intricate puzzles that cling to your mind like cobwebs. The first voice you hear belongs to Plato, whose eyes seem to look straight through you. He tells you of his allegory of the cave, a story you've likely heard before, yet here it feels personal. You see yourself chained in that dark cavern, watching shadows dance on the walls, believing them to be reality. The fire crackles, the echoes deceive, and the question arises, if you were to break free and see the world outside, could you truly trust your senses? Your feet lead you deeper into the chamber, where René Descartes sits at a desk, scratching words into parchment. You lean over and read, cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. It hits you that he's not trying to prove the existence of the world around him first, he's starting with the one thing he cannot doubt, his own thinking mind. You feel the unsettling realization that maybe everything else, every face, every color, every sound, could be an elaborate illusion. But your awareness of doubting it all is itself undeniable. You walk on, and the room changes again. Here stands John Locke, calmly speaking of the mind as a blank slate, a tabula rasa. He invites you to picture yourself as a newborn, with no concepts, no categories, just raw experience flowing in through the senses. Knowledge, he tells you, begins not from grand innate ideas but from the patient accumulation of impressions. You feel the weight of this thought, perhaps your entire mental world is built from countless small bricks of sensory input. But in the corner, a figure smirks, David Hume. He warns you that cause and effect are never truly seen, you only see one thing happen after another, and your mind assumes a connection. The sun has risen every day of your life, but that doesn't prove it will tomorrow. His skepticism seeps into you, and for a moment, you wonder if certainty is an illusion. Then, as if to steady your footing, Immanuel Kant approaches. He tells you that while all knowledge begins with experience, not all of it arises from experience. Your mind, he explains, has built-in structures, like space and time, through which you shape the world you perceive. Without them, there would be no coherent experience at all. You begin to understand that knowledge may not be purely about discovering what is out there, it is also about understanding the lens through which you see. As you move toward the far side of the chamber, you realize epistemology has not given you all the answers. Instead, it has sharpened your questions. It has made you more aware of the fragility of what you claim to know, and more cautious about trusting the surface of things. You leave with a deeper awareness that every step you take in this philosophical journey will be shaped by what you can justify and by what you cannot. You leave behind the towering marble halls of metaphysics, where questions of existence echoed endlessly, and step into a quieter, more precise chamber. Here, the walls are lined with shelves of books, scrolls, and instruments, each one promising a path toward truth. If metaphysics was about what is, epistemology is about how you know. It is the study of knowledge itself, its nature, its sources, its limits. You pause at the doorway. A voice in your mind asks, do you truly know anything, or do you only think you know? It's a question as old as philosophy itself, and you cannot help but feel the slight tremor of uncertainty run through you. You begin your journey by facing the first challenge, defining knowledge. Ancient thinkers once said knowledge was justified true belief. You quickly understand why a belief must be true to be considered knowledge, and you must have reasons, justification, for holding it. But soon, you encounter the infamous Gettier problem, which reveals that even justified true beliefs can sometimes be correct only by accident. You realize that certainty is far more fragile than you imagined. You walk further into the chamber and encounter four great pillars, each representing a source of knowledge. The first is perception, the information you gain from your senses. You reach out and touch a smooth stone slab, its coolness tells you something real about the world. Yet, shadows of doubt creep in. Your senses can be fooled by illusions, by dreams, by the subtle tricks of the mind. You remember the philosopher who wondered if he might be dreaming even at this moment. The second pillar is reason, the structured, logical thinking that allows you to deduce truths without direct observation. Mathematics stands here like a flawless tower, each step built perfectly upon the last. And yet, you notice that pure reason, without any grounding in experience, can build castles in the air, perfect in structure but detached from reality. The third pillar is memory, a storehouse of past experiences. Without it, all knowledge would crumble into the present moment. But you realize memory is a slippery ally, it fades, distorts, and reshapes itself over time. You think of times when you were certain of an event, only to discover later that it happened differently, or not at all. The fourth pillar is testimony, knowledge you gain from others. It's impossible to learn everything firsthand, so you rely on what people, books, and institutions tell you. Yet, this source too is vulnerable to error, bias, and deception. You begin to see that knowing is not a single act but a balancing act. You must weigh evidence, cross-check sources, test assumptions, and remain open to correction. Knowledge is not a treasure you find and lock away, it is a living thing, always being examined, strengthened, and sometimes abandoned. The chamber begins to darken, and in the shadows, you see three looming figures: skepticism, dogmatism, and fallibilism. Skepticism whispers that you can never truly know anything, it tempts you toward despair and inaction. Dogmatism insists you already know the truth and need look no further, it tempts you toward arrogance and blindness. Fallibilism, quieter but steadier, admits that your knowledge will always be incomplete, yet still worth pursuing. You feel drawn to this third figure, sensing that it offers a path forward without false certainty or hopeless doubt. At the far end of the chamber, a door opens to a long corridor filled with moral dilemmas and ethical puzzles. You realize that epistemology has not given you perfect certainty, but it has sharpened your awareness of what you do and do not know. And soon, you will need that clarity, because the next part of your journey will demand not just understanding, but judgment. You take a breath, step forward, and leave epistemology behind. You stand at the edge of a vast library, but it is not filled with ordinary books. Each book claims to hold the truth, yet no two agree. Some speak with mathematical precision, others with poetic mysticism. Some whisper ancient wisdom, others shout modern certainties. But you know this much: without understanding how to determine truth, you cannot rely on any of them. You step forward, not to read blindly, but to ask a deeper question: how do you know what you know? The very ground beneath you seems unstable. Every belief you've carried feels like it could crumble under scrutiny. You realize that your mind, so used to accepting appearances, must now become its own investigator. You will no longer be satisfied with, "It is true because I was told so." You will demand evidence, consistency, and reasoning. You begin with perception, the gateway of the senses. You recall how your eyes can be fooled by illusions, how your ears can mishear, how your memory can distort. Reality reaches you only through these fragile channels, and you wonder: if the senses are flawed, can you ever be certain about the external world? You test yourself, staring at a distant light to see if it flickers, smelling the air for hidden scents, feeling the coolness of the stone floor beneath your feet. You know the sensations are real, but you cannot yet prove that the world they depict matches reality as it truly is. Next comes reason, the mind's ability to process and connect ideas. Here, you find more stability. Logic seems to hold even when the senses fail. A triangle must have three sides. If all humans are mortal, and you are human, then you must be mortal. Reason operates not on what is seen or heard, but on the structure of thought itself. Yet you also sense its limitation. It can work perfectly on false premises, building entire castles of argument that collapse when their foundation is wrong. Then, you confront authority, the knowledge you inherit from teachers, books, experts. You feel the temptation to trust those who seem wiser, yet you've already seen how even the most confident can be mistaken. You vow to respect authority but never to kneel before it uncritically. You will compare claims, test evidence, and challenge assumptions. As you move deeper into this realm, you encounter the problem of certainty. Some philosophers tell you absolute certainty is impossible, others say you can reach it in rare cases. You wrestle with the unsettling possibility that all you can ever have is justified belief, not unshakable truth. But instead of despair, this realization brings you a strange freedom, the freedom to keep learning, keep questioning, keep refining your map of reality without clinging to illusions of perfection. Finally, you emerge from the library into an open courtyard bathed in starlight. You look up, and the sky seems more infinite than before. Now, you do not simply see stars, you recognize that you believe they are there based on perception, reasoning, and trust in science, but that each step in that chain has been examined. You feel more grounded, not because you have all the answers, but because you understand the process of arriving at them. You leave the realm of epistemology with a new compass. You will not believe blindly. You will not dismiss ideas without cause. You will weigh, test, and decide for yourself. This compass will be your constant ally in the next stage, where the question shifts from what is true to what is right. You leave metaphysics behind, not because it's solved, but because you have accepted that its deepest questions will remain as guiding mysteries rather than final answers. Now, you turn toward epistemology, the study of knowledge itself. You begin with a deceptively simple question. How do you know what you know? At first, this feels almost trivial. You think about your senses: sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell. You rely on them every second of your life. If you see a red apple on the table, you believe it's there because your eyes report it to you. If you pick it up, feel its smooth skin, and smell its sweet scent, your other senses confirm the impression. But then the questions start pulling at you like threads in a sweater. What if your senses are sometimes wrong? You remember mirages, optical illusions, the sound of a voice in a dream that wasn't really there. You realize that your senses are powerful, but not infallible. This is where the problem of skepticism steps into your path. You ask yourself, what if I can't truly know anything for certain? You imagine a world in which every piece of information could be fabricated by a faulty brain, a deceptive world, or even an external manipulator. The thought is unsettling. But philosophers have walked this path before you. Descartes, for example, doubted everything until he found one point he could not doubt. If I am doubting, I must exist in some form to do the doubting. From this, he built a foundation: I think, therefore I am. You experiment with this in your own mind. You strip away every assumption about the world, about other people, about time itself, and you are left with the undeniable fact that you are experiencing something. Even if it's an illusion you are having. That is your starting point. From there, you explore sources of knowledge. You walk into the first chamber, empiricism, the belief that knowledge comes primarily from sensory experience. Here, you imagine yourself as an explorer gathering evidence. Every truth you accept must be tested by observation and experiment. If you cannot see, hear, measure, or otherwise detect it, you cannot claim to truly know it. It feels rigorous, grounded, scientific. But you soon see its weakness. Sometimes you must act without perfect sensory confirmation. This pushes you into the second chamber, rationalism, the belief that reason and logic can produce knowledge independent of sensory input. You picture yourself in a vast, empty room with no sights, sounds, or textures, yet your mind still constructs mathematics, geometry, and logical relationships. You can know that 2 + 2 is equal to 4 without ever having counted apples. It feels pure, but also distant from the messiness of reality. You keep going. You find constructivism, which tells you that knowledge is built, not found, shaped by your mind, culture, and experiences. Two people can witness the same event and come away with entirely different understandings because their mental frameworks filter and interpret it differently. This reminds you that knowledge is not a perfect mirror of reality, but a human-made map of it. As you move through epistemology, you realize that the way you define knowing changes the way you live. If you demand absolute certainty, you will find yourself frozen in skepticism. If you accept reasonable certainty, you can act in the world with confidence while leaving room for correction. You adopt a stance of fallibilism, the idea that you can know things well enough to function, but should always be open to revision. By the time you step out of epistemology's halls, you understand that knowledge is not a trophy to win, but a living process. It is a balance between doubt and trust, between evidence and interpretation. You now carry tools, not answers carved in stone, but a toolkit to test, refine, and adapt what you know. And with those tools, you feel ready to face the next realm, ethics, where knowing is not enough, because you must also decide what is right. You've just walked out of epistemology with your mind tuned to question how you know things. Now, in ethics, we'll shift the lens from knowledge to action, not what is true, but what should you do? You step into a new chamber of thought, one unlike any you've explored before. Gone are the cool, marble halls of epistemology where certainty and doubt play their endless tug-of-war. Here, the air is warmer, heavier, charged with the weight of human consequence. Everywhere you look, the walls are lined with scenes, acts of kindness, acts of cruelty, choices made in moments of weakness, and decisions taken with unshakable resolve. This is ethics, the domain where philosophy stops asking only what is true and begins demanding what you will do. The first thing you notice is that here, knowledge alone is not enough. In epistemology, you could examine an idea from a distance, never touching it, never letting it touch you. But in ethics, every concept draws you in, because here theory bleeds into life. You cannot talk about justice without considering the prisoner in the cell. You cannot discuss generosity without imagining the hungry child. The stakes are always human, always real. A figure approaches, not a single teacher, but a chorus of them. Aristotle stands beside Immanuel Kant, who nods toward John Stuart Mill, while Confucius watches silently, his eyes sharp yet calm. Each of them holds a lantern, casting overlapping lights across the floor. You realize these are the major ethical traditions, and their lanterns are the frameworks that guide human behavior. Aristotle steps forward first, his voice deep and steady. He tells you that ethics begins not with rules but with character. For him, the goal of life is eudaimonia, human flourishing, achieved by living in balance, cultivating virtues like courage, honesty, and generosity. He points to the golden mean, the middle ground between extremes. Too much courage becomes recklessness, too little becomes cowardice. You walk along a painted path illustrating this balance, and you begin to see that in Aristotle's world, morality is less about strict commandments and more about habits of being. Then Kant steps into the light. Where Aristotle spoke of balance, Kant speaks of duty, an unyielding moral law written not in the stars, but in your very capacity for reason. He tells you that to act morally is to act from principle, not from convenience or desire. The categorical imperative burns in his words, act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. You imagine yourself in countless situations, telling the truth when it costs you, keeping a promise when no one would know you broke it. Here, morality is rigid, unbending, like a spine holding the body of humanity upright. But Mill interrupts with a gentler smile. His lantern burns differently, not in cold logic or balanced virtue, but in the warm arithmetic of happiness. He places a scale in your hands and tells you that every choice can be weighed, pleasure against pain, benefit against harm. The moral action, he says, is the one that maximizes well-being for the greatest number. You picture yourself standing before two roads, one leading to joy for many, the other to misery for few but bliss for yourself, and you feel the pull of the utilitarian calculation. Confucius finally speaks, his words deliberate and steady. His ethics are not about personal virtue alone, nor impersonal calculations, but about relationships. Harmony, respect, and duty to family and society are the moral compass. He paints morality as a dance between the self and the community, a rhythm of respect, tradition, and the steady shaping of a just society through small acts of rightness. You realize now that ethics is not a single voice but a chorus. Some call you to inner excellence. Some demand you obey unbreakable laws. Some ask you to measure outcomes. Others tell you to honor the bonds between people. You walk further into this ethical landscape, and soon you encounter moral dilemmas. A runaway trolley is hurtling toward 5 people tied to the tracks. You stand by a lever that could switch the trolley to another track, but on that track is one person. Do you act? Do you kill one to save 5, or refuse to act and let fate decide? Mill whispers in your ear, urging you toward the greater good. Kant warns you that using one life as a means to save others violates the dignity of the individual. Aristotle wonders about your character, your courage to decide. Confucius asks how your choice will ripple through the harmony of society. You realize ethics is not just a subject you study, it is a mirror you must step into, and once you do, you cannot emerge unchanged. You step forward into a realm where questions no longer hover in abstraction but reach directly into your life. The floor beneath you changes from the polished marble of theory to a winding path made of footprints, each step someone has taken before you, each one a choice. Some paths branch toward light, others toward shadow, and all of them lead somewhere you cannot see from here. This is ethics, the place where philosophy stops asking what is real or how you know and instead demands, what will you do? You feel the weight of it almost immediately. In metaphysics, your thoughts could roam freely among the stars. In epistemology, you could sharpen your tools of reasoning without cutting into your own flesh. But here, every argument points back to you. You are no longer just a thinker, you are a moral actor. You cannot stand still here without, in some sense, having already chosen a side. You first notice the voices. One tells you that the only compass you need is duty, the voice of Immanuel Kant. He says, act only according to that maxim which you can will to become a universal law. You imagine holding your choices up against this universal mirror, asking, if everyone acted like this, what kind of world would it be? The thought makes you straighten your back. Kant leaves no room for excuses, no refuge in personal preference. Right is right, wrong is wrong, regardless of your feelings or the outcome. Then another voice cuts in, warmer, more practical. John Stuart Mill reminds you that actions should be judged by their consequences, and the goal is the greatest happiness for the greatest number. You picture your decisions as ripples in a pond, touching lives you will never meet. Here, morality is not about rigid rules but about maximizing well-being. The weight shifts, now you are balancing outcomes instead of principles. A third voice speaks, older than the others. Aristotle doesn't hand you a strict rule or a calculation, he offers a picture of a life well lived. Virtue, he says, is a habit, cultivated over time. Courage, generosity, honesty, these are not single acts but patterns woven into the fabric of your being. The aim is not merely to do good but to become good. You walk further, and the path splits into even stranger shapes. One trail leads into a world where morality is nothing but power, where right and wrong dissolve into strength and weakness. Night's shadow walks here, challenging you to go beyond conventional morality and create your own values. It is intoxicating and dangerous. Another trail leads into the radical compassion of Buddhism, where morality is bound to the cessation of suffering, and the boundary between self and other begins to blur. You realize something unsettling: every ethical system offers not just rules but a vision of the world, and of you. When you choose one, you are not just picking guidelines, you are shaping the person you will become. As you continue, you come across a small, still pond. Its surface is so calm that your reflection is perfectly clear. You crouch beside it, and in your reflection, you see not just the face you know but flashes of moments that have defined you. Times you stood up for something at personal cost. Times you looked away when someone needed you. Times you chose silence over truth. The pond shows you without judgment, but it makes one thing undeniable: your ethics are not just ideas. They are already written in the life you have lived so far. Here, in this realm, philosophy stops being a distant observer. It grips you by the shoulders and asks, now that you've learned to question reality and knowledge, how will you live? You stand. The path ahead is still uncertain, but one truth is clearer than ever. You cannot walk it without carrying a compass. And whatever compass you choose, duty, consequences, virtue, or something entirely your own, it will guide you far beyond this philosophical journey, into the quiet, unrecorded moments that make up your life. You leave the quiet halls of epistemology and step into a broad courtyard bathed in golden light. The air feels different here, warmer, heavier, as if every step you take carries a weight of consequence. This is the realm of ethics, where philosophy is no longer just about what you know, but about what you do. Ahead of you, three great paths stretch outward like spokes from a wheel. At the center, an inscription carved into marble reads, "Knowing is not enough. You must act." The path of virtue, Aristotle. You walk down the first path and find a serene garden. Olive trees sway gently, and a figure in a white robe greets you with calm eyes, Aristotle himself. He speaks of virtue ethics, a way of living that is not about strict rules or chasing maximum happiness, but about becoming the kind of person who naturally does good. To him, ethics is like archery. The goal is to aim for the golden mean, the balance between extremes. Courage, for example, is the middle point between recklessness and cowardice. Patience lies between laziness and frantic haste. In his view, morality is a skill you build, much like learning to play an instrument, through habit and practice. You sense the appeal, the focus on character over checklists, but also the challenge. It asks for a lifetime of self-reflection and adjustment. The path of duty, Kant. The second path feels colder, more precise. You find yourself in a hall of straight lines and sharp angles, where every step echoes. Here stands Immanuel Kant, who believes morality is not about feelings or outcomes, but about principles. For Kant, the question is not will this make people happy, but could this be a universal law for everyone? He tells you, if you lie to save someone, you have already broken a moral law, because if lying were universal, trust would collapse. His famous command, the categorical imperative, rings in your ears. Act only according to that maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. It's clear, logical, uncompromising. But you also feel the steel in it, a world of moral absolutes where compassion might sometimes bow to duty. The path of consequences, Mill. The final path is brighter, filled with laughter, music, and the smell of bread baking. This is the domain of John Stuart Mill, the champion of utilitarianism. For him, morality is about one thing, maximizing happiness and minimizing suffering for the greatest number. Every decision is a calculation. Will this action, in total, make the world better or worse? It's a deeply compassionate vision, but one that can lead to uncomfortable trade-offs. Would you harm one to save many? Would you sacrifice personal principles if it meant the most joy for the most people? Mill reminds you that life is full of these difficult equations, and ethics is often the art of choosing the lesser pain. The intersection. You step back to the center of the courtyard. The three paths are still open before you, but now you notice countless smaller trails branching in all directions. You realize that ethics is not a single road, it's a living map, and every choice you make draws a new line across it. Philosophy has given you tools, the balance of virtue, the clarity of duty, the compassion of consequences, but no single one can make every decision for you. The marble inscription echoes in your mind as you take your first step forward, knowing the rest of the journey is yours to write. You step forward into a corridor of warm light. It feels different here, less abstract than the halls of epistemology, less dizzying than the landscapes of metaphysics. Here, the air smells faintly of parchment and sandalwood, like a place where people have sat for centuries not just to think, but to decide. Ahead, you see three great doorways. Above the first, virtue. Above the second, duty. Above the third, consequences. You realize these are not merely rooms, they are paths for how one might live. The first door, virtue ethics. You step into the first hall, where sunlight pours through high windows. Marble busts of ancient figures line the walls, none greater than Aristotle, whose steady gaze seems to weigh your character. Here, the guiding question is not what should I do, but what kind of person should I be? In this room, every action is a brushstroke painting the portrait of your soul. Courage, temperance, generosity, each is a virtue cultivated over time, until good actions flow naturally from a well-formed character. You are invited to imagine a choice. If you see a child struggling in the street, virtue ethics asks, would a generous person stop to help? Would a coward walk away? Your decision is not about calculating outcomes or following rules, it is about becoming the sort of person whose instincts are noble. The walls here seem to hum with the thought that moral life is a lifelong habit, not a one-time choice. The second door, deontology. You pass into the next room and immediately feel the change. The space is stark, ordered, almost geometric in its design. At the far end, Immanuel Kant stands, or perhaps the idea of him, his voice clear and steady. Here, morality is about duty, about rules that bind not because of personal desire, but because they are right in themselves. Kant's challenge is simple yet severe. Act only according to that maxim which you can at the same time will to become universal law. If lying is wrong, it is wrong always, no exceptions. If you make a promise, you must keep it, even when breaking it might be easier or more convenient. The room offers you a thought experiment. A murderer comes to your door asking for your friend's location. Virtue might urge compassion, utilitarian logic might permit lying to save a life. But here, duty insists, truth-telling is sacred, to lie is to break the moral law, and once that law is broken for convenience, it collapses entirely. The weight of this path presses on you. It is not easy, but it is unyielding. The third door, consequentialism. The final doorway opens into a wide, bright chamber. Here, the walls are covered not with portraits or geometric patterns, but with scales, great balancing devices measuring harm and benefit. This is the world of Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, where actions are judged not by character or rule, but by their outcomes. Utilitarianism, the strongest voice here, speaks plainly. The right action is the one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number. In this room, nothing is sacred except the balance of well-being over suffering. You are given another choice. A hospital has 5 patients in need of organ transplants. A healthy traveler arrives for a routine checkup. By sacrificing one, you could save 5. Would you do it? Here, the calculus is relentless, 5 lives outweigh 1, yet your instincts may recoil. This is the tension of consequentialism. It forces you to measure morality by numbers, even when numbers clash with the heart. The crossroads of morality. You step back into the warm light of the corridor, feeling the weight of each room still on your shoulders. Virtue calls for the shaping of the self. Duty calls for the honor of the law. Consequences call for the balance of happiness and suffering. And yet, standing here, you realize no philosopher can make your choice for you. Theories can guide, but life is lived in moments, and moments demand decision. Some days you will lean toward virtue, others toward duty, and others toward outcomes. What matters is not finding a final answer, but learning to navigate these paths with awareness. You leave the corridor, not with a rule book, but with a compass, one that points not north, but toward the life you choose to live. You step forward, leaving behind the swirling corridors of epistemology, where questions about truth and knowledge still echo faintly behind you. The air shifts. Here, the chamber is warmer, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. The hall of ethics is less like a library and more like a court, a temple, and a battlefield all at once. Tall pillars rise to the ceiling, each carved with words in different languages: justice, compassion, duty, virtue, freedom, responsibility. You walk slowly, because the place commands it. Every step feels like a question: what is the right thing to do? The ancient voices. On one side of the hall, Aristotle stands beneath a statue of a golden lyre. He does not speak in commands, but in counsel. A good life, he says, is not built in a single act, but in a lifetime of habits. Practice courage until courage becomes natural. Practice honesty until honesty becomes reflex. This is virtue ethics. Be the kind of person for whom good actions flow without force. Nearby, Confucius bows in quiet greeting. His scrolls are filled with rituals, roles, and relationships. For him, morality is not an individual project but a harmony between people, where respect and responsibility ripple outward from family to society. Across the hall, a Stoic philosopher, perhaps Epictetus, leans on a staff. He reminds you that life will hand you pain, loss, and injustice, but your duty is to act with reason and integrity regardless of what the world throws at you. These are the roots: virtue, harmony, duty, planted deep in history. The law of reason. Further in, a tall figure steps forward. It is Immanuel Kant, with sharp eyes and an unshakable presence. He speaks as if delivering a verdict: act only according to that maxim by which you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. This is the categorical imperative: no bending of rules for convenience, no exceptions because it benefits you. If lying is wrong, it is wrong even when it is easy, even when it helps. For Kant, morality is built on unbreakable principles, not shifting calculations. It is a stern vision, but one that promises moral certainty in a world of doubt. The calculus of consequences. Opposite him, two men, Bentham and Mill, unroll long parchments covered in numbers, columns, and sums. This is utilitarianism. They explain, the right action is the one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Here, morality is not fixed law but careful weighing. A lie may be bad, but if it prevents great suffering, perhaps it becomes good. Every decision becomes a moral equation: benefits versus harms. It is flexible, adaptable, and yet dangerous, because in chasing the happiness of the many, one might forget the rights of the few. Modern crossroads. The chamber shifts again, and now you see voices from the modern era gathered in clusters. Jean-Paul Sartre stands apart, declaring that no universal moral law can relieve you of responsibility. Your choices are yours alone, and with freedom comes the weight of creating your own ethics. Nearby, Carol Gilligan speaks of care ethics, reminding you that morality is not only about rules or outcomes, but about empathy, relationships, and understanding the needs of others in their specific contexts. And in the shadows, contemporary thinkers whisper about dilemmas unique to our age: artificial intelligence, climate responsibility, genetic engineering, questions Aristotle and Kant could never have imagined. Here, morality is no longer just ancient wisdom or timeless rules, it is a living, evolving conversation. The final decision. You reach the far end of the hall, where there is no statue, no voice, no book, only a mirror. You see yourself reflected, but not as you are. You see yourself making choices, shaping a life, leaving marks on others that ripple far beyond your awareness. The philosophers fade. The voice is quiet. The Hall of Ethics does not give you an answer, because no answer would be enough. Instead, it gives you a compass, one that points not to an external truth, but to the direction you choose to call good. You leave the hall carrying that compass, knowing that every step from here on is a moral act in itself. The journey through philosophy is over. But the real journey, your journey, has only just begun. You step away from the marble staircase that led you out of the hall of epistemology. The air is warmer here, scented with sandalwood and parchment, and the stone floor shifts into polished wood. Before you stands a vast circular chamber, its domed ceiling painted with scenes of human life, birth, work, love, war, and death, all spiraling inward toward a central golden compass. At its tip, engraved in fine script, are the words, "To know is not enough." One must decide. You realize this hall is different. It is not about abstract speculation. It is about the living pulse of choice, about actions that shape lives, yours and others. Here, knowledge meets responsibility. A soft voice echoes around the chamber, though you see no one yet. Ethics is the branch of philosophy concerned with how one ought to live. It asks, what is good? What is right? And when those answers conflict, which do you choose? The voice seems to belong to the library itself, as though every moral thinker who has walked these floors is speaking at once. You are drawn toward the first alcove on your right. Inside, the light is golden, and on a pedestal sits a worn leather-bound book stamped with the name Aristotle. A figure in a white himation stands beside it, smiling as though greeting an old friend. This is virtue ethics, he says in a warm Greek accent. He speaks of eudaimonia, the flourishing life, and how the path to it lies not in strict rules or cold calculations, but in cultivating virtues, courage, temperance, justice, wisdom. He points to painted panels showing a farmer acting with fairness toward neighbors, a soldier showing mercy to a defeated enemy, a teacher guiding students with patience. Live not in extremes, Aristotle tells you. Find the golden mean. You walk on, and the light shifts to silver. In the next alcove stands a tall man with sharp eyes and a strict posture, Immanuel Kant. The room smells faintly of ink and candle wax, and his tone is precise. Your actions, he says, must be guided by duty, not convenience. To act morally is to follow principles that could be universal laws. Treat humanity, in yourself and in others, always as an end, never merely as a means. In a flash, you see visions, the stranger returning a lost wallet without checking the cash, a whistleblower speaking truth despite risk, a person keeping a promise even when no one would know if they broke it. Kant's words cut like crystal, do what is right because it is right. But the path curves, and now you find yourself before John Stuart Mill, seated at a wooden table littered with papers. He pours you tea and speaks of utilitarianism. Right and wrong, he says, depend on the balance of happiness over suffering. The best action is that which brings the greatest good to the greatest number. You are shown a village choosing how to distribute scarce medicine, one dose to save one life, or divide it to ease the pain of many. Here, morality feels like weighing lives on invisible scales. The path widens into an open plaza. Around you, scenes from all corners of the world flicker like living paintings. A nurse in a war zone tending to an enemy soldier. A business leader choosing between profit and environmental damage. A friend deciding whether to tell a painful truth or protect someone from it. Each one feels close enough to touch. The voice returns. Ethics is not about memorizing rules, it says. It is about navigating complexity with a compass built from reason, empathy, and courage. Sometimes Aristotle's virtues guide you. Sometimes Kant's duty commands you. Sometimes Mill's calculations persuade you. But the choice is always yours. At the center of the hall lies the golden compass from the ceiling mural, now real, resting on a marble stand. Its needle does not point north, it points toward you. You understand the message. The study of philosophy has brought you here not to give you a single answer, but to place the responsibility of choosing in your own hands. You lift the compass. It feels warm, alive, almost breathing. And as you step out of the hall of ethics, you are no longer merely a seeker of knowledge. You are its wielder. Every choice you make beyond these doors will be part of the great philosophical story. You step into a quiet, circular chamber at the far end of the library. Its walls are lined with ancient scrolls, leather-bound tomes, and polished wooden shelves that curve like the rim of the world. The air smells faintly of cedar and ink, as if wisdom itself has been preserved in the fibers of the parchment. In the center, a single table holds an unrolled scroll, illuminated by the soft glow of an oil lamp. You feel as though the room is not merely for reading, but for reflection, a place where knowledge transforms into guidance. A robed figure sits across the table. Their face is neither young nor old, their voice neither male nor female. They greet you without words, gesturing for you to sit. On the table, they place a small object, a compass. But unlike a sailor's tool, this one does not point north. Its needle shifts and sways with each thought that passes through your mind, as though measuring not direction, but intention. This, the figure says softly, is the compass of the soul. It will not tell you where to go, but whether the path you choose will lead toward or away from what you hold most sacred. You glance down at it, watching the needle tremble, and realize this is not about rules carved in stone. It is about something deeper, the inner force that guides you when no one is watching. The robed figure begins to speak of ethics, not as a list of commands, but as a living conversation that has lasted for thousands of years. They tell you of Aristotle, who believed that virtue is a habit formed by repeated right action, like a craftsman shaping beauty through steady hands. They tell you of Confucius, who taught that harmony begins in the self and extends outward, to family, to society, to the world. They tell you of Immanuel Kant, who held that certain duties are unshakable, no matter the consequences, as though morality itself were a law written into the structure of reality. They tell you of John Stuart Mill, who weighed the balance of happiness and suffering like a merchant counting gold, believing that the greatest good for the greatest number is the surest guide. The scroll before you is blank. The figure slides it toward you. This, they say, is the part of philosophy only you can write. You hesitate, realizing that all the knowledge you've gathered in the library, from logic to metaphysics, from the nature of truth to the power of reason, has been leading here. Not to answers, but to choices. You take the pen. As you touch it to the parchment, scenes rise in your mind. A friend asking for help at great cost to yourself. A stranger wronged in the marketplace when you could easily walk away. A voice inside you weighing the easy path against the just one. You write slowly, not because you do not know what to say, but because each word feels like a step taken into your future self. When you finish, the figure takes the compass and places it in your hand. Its needle steadies for the first time since you entered the room. You realize it no longer reacts to passing thoughts, it now moves only when you act. You walk out of the library's final chamber and into the bright open air. The world outside is noisy, unpredictable, and full of crossroads. But in your palm, the compass of the soul hums with a silent certainty. It will not make the choices for you, but it will remind you of the person you wish to be. And as the great doors close behind you, you understand that the journey through the library was never about learning what to think, it was about learning how to live. Stoicism began in Athens around 300 BCE, when Zeno of Citium, a Phoenician merchant shipwrecked far from home, wandered into the bustling agora. He found himself in the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch, where merchants traded goods, philosophers debated, and colorful murals depicted great battles. There, he began teaching a philosophy rooted in resilience, virtue, and harmony with nature. At its heart, Stoicism teaches that virtue is the only true good. External things, wealth, status, health, are not inherently good or bad, they are indifferent. What truly matters is the moral character with which we meet life's challenges. The Stoics defined four cardinal virtues. Wisdom, the ability to judge what is truly valuable. Courage, the willingness to face fear, pain, and uncertainty. Justice, the commitment to fairness and the common good. Temperance, the discipline to act with self-control and balance. Central to Stoicism is the dichotomy of control, some things are up to us, and some are not. Our thoughts, choices, and actions are ours to command. The weather, the opinions of others, or the twists of fate, these lie beyond our control. Peace comes from focusing on what we can change and letting go of the rest. The Stoic ideal of apatheia is not emotional numbness, but freedom from destructive passions. By training the mind to respond with reason rather than impulse, we cultivate equanimity, a steady calm in the face of life's storms. Daily practice was key for the Stoics. They reflected each evening on their actions, asking, "Did I live with virtue today?" They visualized challenges ahead each morning, preparing themselves for hardship. They reminded themselves of mortality, not morbidly, but to cherish the time they had. In modern life, Stoicism offers tools for resilience in stress, leadership under pressure, and self-discipline in a world of distractions. Its principles still guide soldiers, entrepreneurs, athletes, and anyone who seeks strength through reason. To live as a Stoic is to remember, we do not control the winds, but we can adjust our sails. The air in Athens is warm with the late morning sun, and the marble pillars of the Stoa Poikile cast long shadows across the stone floor. Merchants shout their prices in the market beyond, and the smell of freshly baked bread mixes with the salty breeze drifting in from the port. Amid the bustle, a small group gathers in the shade of the painted colonnade, their voices calm but firm, their eyes steady as if anchored in another world. At the center stands Zeno of Citium, the founder of what would be known as Stoicism. He is not a priest, nor a politician, but a man who speaks of virtue as if it were the most practical tool a person could own. Around him are students, merchants, soldiers, artisans, people from all walks of life, each drawn by a promise of something more enduring than wealth or fame. Zeno speaks first of the dichotomy of control. Some things are up to us, he says, our thoughts, our actions, our choices. Other things are not, the weather, the opinions of others, the roll of fortune's dice. Wisdom, he tells them, is knowing the difference and acting only where influence is possible. The crowd listens, and you can almost hear the hum of recognition in their silence. A soldier thinks of battles lost and won, and realizes he cannot change the outcome, only his courage in the face of it. A merchant thinks of market collapses and sees that while he cannot command the economy, he can command his own honesty and discipline. From the edges of the group, the voices of later Stoics echo through time. Seneca whispers, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Marcus Aurelius reminds, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Epictetus, once a slave, declares, "No man is free who is not master of himself." This is not a philosophy of retreat or cold indifference. It is a call to live with courage in a world you cannot fully control. It teaches that virtue, justice, courage, temperance, wisdom is the only true good, and that wealth, status, and even health are fleeting, neither blessings nor curses by themselves. And as the lesson ends, the students return to the noise of the marketplace, yet something in them has shifted. They walk the same streets, face the same problems, but their minds are steadier, like ships with anchors deep in the seabed. This is the gift of Stoicism, a way of living that belongs as much to an emperor of Rome as to a modern person checking their phone in a crowded cafe. Stoicism is more than just a philosophy from ancient Greece and Rome. It's a mental framework for living, a discipline that teaches you to anchor your peace of mind in what you can control, and to let go of what you cannot. The Stoics, like Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, believed that life will inevitably throw storms at you. People will wrong you, fortune will turn against you, and events will unfold beyond your power to change. But none of that can truly harm you unless you surrender your inner state to it. At the core of Stoicism is the dichotomy of control. You control your actions, your thoughts, your intentions. You do not control the weather, the economy, other people's opinions, or even whether you live to see tomorrow. The wise person, the Stoic says, focuses on the first and accepts the second with equanimity. This mindset is not an escape from reality, it is a deeper engagement with it. By refusing to be ruled by fear, anger, or desire for things outside your reach, you become free to act with virtue. And in Stoic ethics, virtue is the only true good. Wealth, fame, comfort, These are called indifferents. They may be preferred or dispreferred, but they are never the measure of a good life. The Stoics taught for cardinal virtues: wisdom, the ability to discern what is good, bad, or indifferent; justice, giving each their due and acting fairly in all dealings; courage, facing danger, pain, or loss without surrendering your principles; temperance, self-control and moderation in all things. When you live by these, you are in harmony with nature, not the trees and rivers, but the nature of reality itself. You accept that the world operates according to reason and cause, and you align your actions with that truth. In practice, this means waking each day prepared for challenges. Marcus Aurelius began his mornings reminding himself, "Today, you will meet people who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, and unsociable." By expecting difficulty, you're not pessimistic, you're realistic, and thus unshaken when it arrives. It also means looking inward in the evening. Seneca would review his day, asking, "What did I do well? What could I have done better? What passions disturbed me?" This daily audit isn't self-criticism, it's training for the soul. Stoicism connects deeply to ethics because it refuses to separate moral action from inner discipline. You do what's right not because it will be rewarded, but because virtue is its own reward. You don't act justly to control outcomes, you act justly because injustice corrupts you more than it harms the world. A Stoic life is not one without emotion. It is one where emotions are understood, examined, and placed under the guidance of reason. Anger may arise, but you decide whether to feed it or let it pass. Fear may appear, but you choose to move forward anyway. In the end, Stoicism is a path to freedom, not political freedom, but the freedom no tyrant can touch. The sovereignty over your own mind.